What is up, everybody? Welcome to Real Podcasters, where we help you grow and monetize your podcast. My name is Skylar Beindorf. I have personally been podcasting since 2021. I have monetized 2 of my own shows within 6 weeks of launching them. I run a podcast production studio here in Utah, and I have personally coached dozens of podcasters who have seen big results from it, and I will let the results speak for themselves. If you go to the website, there are testimonials there, but I've seen people been able to double their podcast numbers after working with me. I've had people who were able to monetize their podcast after recording in a professional podcast studio because it looked professional, right? Because it looked professional and because it really showed, like, the sponsors saw the value in it and the reach in it because of the added value that a podcast production studio can do for them. They were able to monetize it sooner. And so I podcast full time. This is what I do all day, every day. And when I started, there weren't a lot of resources out there, which is my whole mission with this podcast, is to help you reach your goals with your podcast. Because it took me probably $30,000 to $40,000 and hundreds of hours for me to actually learn what I've been able to learn. And I've made a lot of mistakes on the way, and I would like to share those mistakes with you. But the first thing when you are podcasting and when you're like, turn on the microphone and you're ready to record is, how do I open this? What's the right way to open this? Do I open this with a hook? Do I open this with my name? Do I just start talking? Do I open the podcast halfway through a conversation? Now, there's a lot of different ways to do this. And I'm going to teach you exactly how you can do this. There are multiple ways. I'm going to go over the multiple different ways that you can do this with your podcast. But for every single episode, there are a few components you need to open your podcast with. Because if you think about it, if your podcast is growing, you have brand new listeners every single episode. And if you have brand new listeners every single episode, well, they don't know who you are. They don't have the context of the last 10 episodes you released. They don't know exactly what this show is about. And so we need to answer those questions as fast as we can, so that way they don't start to disbelieve that this podcast is actually for them, that they're going to get a lot of value from it. So the first thing, not exactly necessarily the first thing, but one of the things that need to be said within the first 5 minutes, in my opinion, of your podcast is, 1, the podcast name. If you rewind this podcast, you'll see exactly how I opened it, which is how I love to open podcasts. But there are other ways, and I will probably do some different ways as this podcast goes on. So pay attention to those as we continue. But I always open with the podcast name, the purpose of the podcast, my name, and my purpose or goal for the podcast, for the listeners, or some sort of credibility or something that says, hey, this guy knows what he's talking about. Now, the thing that is the same and different every episode is you are going to tell the listeners what they can expect from this episode. So I want you to put yourself in the mind of a listener, of a brand new listener. They're like, okay, they're a little skeptical when they hit a podcast because they're brand new. They're being introduced to this. So they're going to hit play and be like, okay, what exactly is this? Oh, okay, this is Real Podcasters. Oh, they help you grow and monetize their show. Interesting. I'm a podcaster. That's relevant to me. Or maybe it's not relevant to them, right? Maybe they haven't even launched yet, and so this podcast would not be for them. So they're going to decide right there, okay, is this for me or is this not? Because the truth is, if it's not for them, we don't want them to listen. They're not going to return. And so that doesn't give us very good data back as far as download numbers, what is really actually happening. And it doesn't, we're going to have a really low retention rate, which we don't want. So you always say those 2 things, and then your name, your purpose. And then, so the thing that is different and the same every time is you've got to tell the listener, because they're going to be wondering, is this exact episode for me? Is this what I need to listen to? Is this going to be relevant to my current situation or my problem? Or is this going to entertain me in the way I want? Or am I going to get some mindset out of this the way I want? So if you're doing a solo, you're going to say why this episode is worth their time, what they're going to get out of this episode, because that is their question. So I want you to also think about this. When a host And that's another thing is podcasts, you don't have to be perfect with these. So when a listener first hits play on your episode, they usually don't hit play and turn off their phone. Like, doesn't matter if they're driving, it doesn't matter if they're at home. They usually hit play and they're still deciding, okay, do I actually want to commit to the next 20, 40 hour to this podcast? And so they usually keep their phone out, which is why, to me, it's really important to answer those questions immediately. So people are like, oh, okay, I can commit to this because this sounds like it's going to be extremely relevant to me. But they're wondering, is this episode worth my time? And so just make sure you tell them, hey, this is what I'm going to go over in this podcast. Or let's say you have a guest, right? It's not a solo like this one. Because if you notice in the beginning, I mentioned, hey, this is what I'm going to help you go over. I'm going to help you guys open your episodes the right way. Make sure you get all these components in it the right way, right? And multiple different ways to open it. So if you have a guest and you're not totally sure what you're going to talk about, you can do one of two things. You can, you can record an intro later about what you guys talked about, which I highly recommend you do because it's hard to say exactly what you're about to go over if you don't know what you're about to go over. Because if you've been caught podcasting for any amount of time and you've had guests on your show, you know that podcast, like what you're talking about, can easily go in another direction really fast. So you either need to be extremely disciplined on making sure that the conversation is relevant right there and then, or you just have to record something after, in my opinion, which I just recommend that anyway, because you can create a better hook. You can perfect this intro, because the first few minutes of an episode, that's when people are still deciding if they're going to be in it or not, or if they're going to listen the whole time. So it's good to just have that really down and nice and good. But this is still something that you can do in real time. You don't have to always record something later. It's just, you're going to be that much better and you're going to retain that much more people if it is done either right after the interview or when you go to produce the episode. So make sure you always let them know why they should listen. Now, these different components, so it was basically your show and the purpose, you as the host and your purpose or some credibility, and then this episode. What are they going to get from this episode? So those are three different components that I believe need to be in every single episode, every single one. But here's the thing. You can mix and match these up. So I could have started with, hey, if you are having a hard time opening up your podcast, you turn on the mic and you're just like, you just don't know what to say. Well, here, let me help you with that. I'm going to help you and open your podcast and show you 4 different ways that you can open it. Ready, go. Welcome to Real Pod. I think you get what I'm saying there is you can mix and match where these go. You could start with what they're going to get out of the episode, the name, and then your name. Or honestly, you can mix that up in any single way. As long as you answer those within the first, I'd say 3 to 5 minutes of the episode. Ideally, 2 minutes, I'd think 1 minute, because attention spans are just going down the drain, as you know, as someone who produces content. People don't have a lot of time before they're just like, I'm going to move on to something else. So get those few components in. Your show, why they should listen to this episode. If you get all those in, you are going to experience a lot more downloads for one, and a lot more people are going to listen for longer than just the first few minutes. So get those in. If you do that, they will improve, I promise. If this episode was helpful to you, if this is going to help you in your podcast production, if it's going to help you get more listeners, if it's going to help you open your podcast better, go subscribe to this show on your podcast listening app. You're probably listening on Apple or Spotify. Scroll down, hit subscribe on those, because I'm going to be releasing more episodes similar to this about single topics on podcasting that will help you improve your show. So go hit subscribe, and I will see you in the next episode.